Today we have the parable of the prodigal son, a very familiar parable. You probably don't even need to be religious or Christian to ever heard it before. It's the third in a series of three parables that we find in the 15th chapter of the Gospel of Luke. The first parable is the parable of the lost sheep, then we have the parable of the lost coin, and then we have the parable of the lost son, or commonly known as the parable of the prodigal son. Now, just as a reminder and just to take note here, Jesus seems to prefer to use this particular way of teaching called the parable for his particular message. So Jesus, and we find this especially in the Gospel of Luke, is very fixated and focused on something called the kingdom of God. And particularly the kingdom of God is this radical new reality, this radical new community in which people live that is very different than the world that we live in today. So the world that we live in, we have certain people who are on top and certain people who are on the bottom. And in the kingdom of God, those who are first shall be last, and those who are last shall be first. The poor will be exalted, the rich will be torn down, the powerful will no longer have as much power and influence, and those who are powerless and marginalized will be lifted up and favored by God. And so parables, I think, are particularly effective in teaching this kind of message because parables have this way of orienting you and then disorienting you and then reorienting you. I heard that from a seminary professor once in the past. So I believe that the way that parables will orient you is that Jesus meets us where we are. And I think that's good news just in and of itself, that Jesus doesn't come at us with doctrines or creeds or these real esoteric, abstract concepts of philosophy, but rather Jesus comes to us in the language that we understand. He meets us where we are, and such is the case with parables. So you usually see that Jesus will tell a story, and the stories in the common vocabulary and geography and culture of the people who were hearing the story. Then he disorients us, and so he'll introduce something that's very different, something that kind of throws us off balance, an unexpected element, an unexpected piece of action. And then he reorients us to a new way of thinking. He reorients our focus on something else, which is supposed to reveal the nature of God or the kingdom of God. And so that is the case with the three parables in the 15th chapter of Luke, and particularly in this last parable, the one that's known as the parable of the prodigal son. So you know the story, hopefully. The story is that there's a man who has two sons, and the younger of the two sons comes to his dad and says, "Dad, I wish you were dead." Well, actually, he doesn't say those words, but what he does say is that I want my inheritance, and I want it now, which is in effect saying, I wish you were dead, because that's when you get your inheritance. But he doesn't want to wait until his father dies. He wants it right now. Amazingly, the father gives it to him. And so the young man takes his fortune off into the country and he spends it in riotous living, we presume. And then one day he finds himself in a famine. He has spent all of his money. He no longer has any friends. No one gives him anything. And he is tending to pigs in a pig pen far, far away from home. And it's in the pig pen that he comes to himself and he remembers that his father's slaves actually eat better than he's eating right then, and that maybe what he can do is go back to the father and beg his father not to be reinstated as a son, but rather to be reinstated as a servant, and thereby he would save his own life. And so he gets himself together, he starts practicing what he's going to say, his confession, his apology, and then he sets out and before he gets home, the father meets him and doesn't even let him get his full apology out, and he wraps his arms around him and calls for a ring and a robe and sandals, and then to kill the fatted calf, and they throw a great big party. And then the elder son, hearing about all of this, becomes very indignant because he is the one that has been faithful this whole time and has not received so much praise and glory as this young son. And then the father goes out to where the older son is, refusing to come into the party, and begs him to come and be a part of the celebration as well. Now, there's so much going on in this parable. There's no way that I could pull apart every single bit of it. So I just want to focus on one little thing here. And it's all around that time in which the young man comes to himself in the pig pen and then makes the journey home. The first thing I'd like to point out is that his ruin is complete, that he is absolutely at the end of his rope. And I think that's important because there's a lot of us who get to that place. I don't know about you, but I'm the kind of person that when I rebel, I like to rebel all out. I like to go as far as I can possibly go. And, I used to be a runner. I mean, I still run from time to time, but there was a time I used to run quite often. And if I was going to do a 10-mile run, I would not go 10 miles out in one direction, because then I would have to turn around and come 10 miles back. And so if I'm going to do a 10-mile run, I would usually go about 5 miles in one direction and then turn around and come 5 miles back. It just makes sense. Well, this young man spends all of the energy in his tank. He takes all of that money that he is given. He takes all his energy and effort going in one direction when he finds himself in the pig pen. And that speaks to people like me, because that's the way I run. When I'm running away from something, when I'm full of energy, I usually go all the way out until I'm exhausted. And then I look to look around and realize that I have no energy to return. I think that is important for this story here. He goes all the way. And so there are times when we go all the way. And it's important to know that when we go all the way out, we don't have the ability on our own to get back, right? Because we've burned all of our energy going in one direction. We don't have the ability to come another 5 or 10 miles back because we've gone all the way in one direction. That's an important thing for us to notice. The second thing that I want us to notice here is that he makes a decision. This young man gets up on his feet, and even though it is absurd that he can make his way back home, because like I said, he has burned all of his energy and resources going one direction, he still makes a decision and he makes steps. And I think that's important, not because we get rewarded for the things that we do and that God is waiting for us to do the right thing before we get the goodies that God has, but because that changes ourselves. When we are willing to make an effort, whenever we are willing to get up on our feet and make a decision, turn around and go a certain direction, even though it is absurd to think that we could possibly make it back, I think that changes us and it makes us more receptive to God's grace. The decision that we make to do the right thing, this is really, really important, is not what is going to get us the right thing. I don't think that we have the capacity to earn God's grace or to convince God to do something that we need Him to do. And we certainly don't have the capacity to achieve things on our own, not the things that we truly need in our souls. But when we make the decision to go the right way, that makes us more open for the reception of God's grace. So he makes the decision to go back home. And here's the beautiful part of the story. The text says when he was a long way off. A long way off. It means the young man had not even made it home yet. The father sees him and runs down the road and brings him home. And that's the way God works with us. But I want you to just put that image in your mind. Think about that for a second. While he was a long way off, while this young man was still way, 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 way down the road, the father sees him and starts running towards him. Do you know what that means? That means that likely this father was waking up every day and going out and standing in the road and looking over the horizon, and people would be looking at themselves like, I can't believe the old man, he's crazy. That boy is gone. He ain't coming back. He's probably dead. But still, that father went out on the road and he was looking for his son. Day after day after day, he'd get up and his wife would probably say, honey, why do you do this to yourself? Why do you torture yourself? That boy ain't coming back, but he still goes out into the road to look. And then finally, one day, day after day after day, he's been doing this, and he's standing in the road and he sees his son start to come over the horizon. And the moment that he realizes who it is, he breaks into a dead sprint and he runs and he grabs him and he brings him home. That's the beautiful thing about this text, that God is waiting for us. God is looking for us. No matter how far we have strayed, no matter what we have done, no matter what has been done to us, no matter what we've ever thought, felt, or believed about God himself, no matter what kind of mess we have put ourselves in when we've been busted, disgusted, and couldn't be trusted, God was still in the road looking for us. And the moment that we make ourselves available to be embraced by God, he's going to come running towards us. I think that is a wonderful story. I think it is a great moving story, and it's not even all that story has to offer. But that's what I want to point out in this express sermon today, is that love of the Father that stands in the road and looks for us, waiting for us to come home while we are still a long, long way off. God bless.